Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the Orange Spotlight program this afternoon. I'm Larry Bump, the owner of Darms Lane Vineyard, and I'm the least important person in the team that will be appearing here this afternoon. But I just want to say we appreciate how much we appreciate the opportunity to be on this virtual tasting sponsored by the Alumni Association. And we appreciate all of you who have joined in this afternoon. I graduated from Fairfax High School in Osage County in 1957. And the only school I really wanted to go to was OSU. And in fact, I did. And I actually almost started at Oklahoma A&M, but the name changed then shortly after I arrived there to Oklahoma State University. That's how old I am. And I had a wonderful experience as a student at OSU, made so many friends, that many of whom are still my friends today. I learned a lot about a lot of things. Academically, I couldn't have picked a better place to go to school. And when I graduated in 1964, I immediately went off and had an opportunity to work internationally. And my family and I moved to Libya. And then after 3 years there and 3 years in London, we moved to Iran and for a 5-year period. So by the time I came back to the US in 1977 with my family to Tulsa, we had been away from the OSU and the college scene for many years, but we all decided that we wanted to participate in OSU. So I became involved in the College of Business Administration Associates, served later on as a governor of the OSU Foundation, and then later on the Board of Regents. So I love OSU, and it's been good to me, good to my family, and just couldn't have had a better experience. So you might say, well, how does a guy go from Fairfax to OSU to Libya to Iran to the wine business in California? Well, great question. 1991, my late wife and I, Linda, were invited to come out to Napa by some mutual friends who had been an investor in a small little vineyard, which is now the property called Darms Lane Vineyard. We started out as small limited partners. Over a period of time, we bought out some of the other partners as they wished to liquidate, and which finally ended up with us being the largest owner. And in 2002, we bought out the then managing partner and decided we wanted to make this a family operation, which we have done. And it doesn't seem possible that I've been associated with the Darms Lane property for right at 30 years now, but that is the case. As you probably know, that land prices in Napa Valley are fairly pricey. So, I have to admit that I could never have done that if I hadn't had a day job. And I was in the pipeline business, the engineering and construction business, for my entire career, and from which I retired in 2002. But if you're going to start out in the wine business, if you don't inherit the land, you probably need to have a day job along the way to help pay the bills and and buy the property. But it's all turned out very well for us. We're happily making a small volume of wine, but we think it's high quality, and we're proud of it. And it's as I said earlier, it's a family operation. Well, at this point, I'm going to turn the program over to my daughter, Tricia Bump Davis, who is the main cog in the machine here, and she's the general manager. And she and Brian Mox, our winemaker, will take you through the wine. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoy it, and go Pokes.
Again, welcome, and thank you guys for having us here today for this event. It's been really fun for us to put together these talks with my dad, and then also with our winemaker to go through the wines for you guys. So we really hope you enjoy it. As my dad said, I'm the youngest daughter of Larry and Linda Bump, and I also went to OSU. I graduated from Jinx High School in 1989, and I had always told myself that I would go out of state for college for some reason, even though growing up I spent the majority of my time at OSU on weekends, and then also I would go to tennis camp every summer for a week, at least a week of tennis camp every summer at OSU. So I definitely spent a lot of time on campus during my growing up years. But for some reason, I had always told myself I'd go out of state. So my first year of college, I went to SMU in Dallas. And once I arrived there, I realized how different it was from all of my experiences on campus at OSU. And I pretty quickly realized that it was not the college experience that I was looking for. So I actually transferred to OSU after my first full year at SMU. So I transferred to OSU in 1990 and happily graduated from there in 1994 with my degree in management information systems. OSU has really been one of the best decisions I've ever made. I know the majority of my friends that are my best friends today are friends that I've met during my time at OSU. Those are the people that I'm in contact the most frequently with from my school days at OSU. And it's just it was really just such a great experience. The entire college experience for me was everything that you would think of that you wanted college to be. So when I graduated, I went to work as a computer programmer, and I worked for corporate America. And then by that time, by around 2002, my parents became full owners of the property out here in California. And the property used to be known as Crichton Hall, and that was the name of the property when my parents became investors. And then once our family took full ownership of the property, we decided it was time for a name change. And a lot of people ask us where Darms Lane, the name, comes from, and it's actually the actual name of the street that we're on. Darms Lane is this really beautiful little quarter-mile long lane on the valley floor. It's between the town of Yountville and the town of Napa, and we're just off of the highway. So a lot of people who are driving on the highway will see the Darms Lane sign and think that it means specifically to our place, but it's actually the name of the street that we're on. But we have a really beautiful property here in Napa, and I'm lucky enough to be the general manager, and I run the day-to-day operations. Being a part of a family business has been a really rewarding experience. And of course, it's always interesting when you're sending emails to your bosses and you're signing love Tricia at the end instead of just sincerely or things like that. It really kind of brings it all together. And then when you finish your conversation about work, then you talk about all the other things that are going on in your life. It's been pretty amazing experience to be building and growing this business as a family all together. So next we're going to talk you through the wines, and we also wanted to give you a little tour of the vineyard because it's really, really a magical, beautiful place. And if you ever get the chance to come out to the Valley, I hope you'll let us know that you're here so we can have the chance to share it with you. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you guys tonight, and go Pokes. So Darms Lane is my family's property. We own 50 acres in the Oak Knoll district of Napa Valley. My parents have been involved in the property since 1990. In 2000, we started replanting the vineyard that was originally a Chardonnay estate. We started converting it to a Cabernet estate. So today we grow primarily Cabernet. We also grow a little bit of Merlot, Petit Verdot, and Cab Franc. The vineyard age of the property made it so that the production level was going pretty far down. So it just made sense that the vineyard needed to be replanted. So when we replanted the same footprint on the property. We just reorganized it so that the vines were a little bit closer together. So we were able to increase the production from the land from the same amount planted. So this property was originally called Crichton Hall Vineyard, and there was a lot of other partners that were in the process, and a friend of my parents was an investor, and he said, "Oh, this is this really fun investment. You should come be an investor." So their original investment was quite small, and there was about 25 other limited partners in that group. So there was a lot of people, and there wasn't a lot of ownership or anything. It was just kind of a fun investment to have. And then as my parents as they were over the next 8 years, they got more and more involved in the property and started learning more about the day-to-day process. And then when the vineyard needed to be replanted, none of the other partners were interested in helping to fund that replant, so my parents started buying all the other partners out. So it became just owned by 100% our family in 2002. And by that time we were fully into the replant. Our first vintage from this property, we harvested fruit in 2004, but we didn't make commercial wine. So we did a sample of wine just so we could see what the quality was going to be, and our first commercial vintage of wine was 2005. So in 2005, we made our very first estate-grown Cabernet, and when my parents took ownership, we were trying to kind of decide if we were going to stay with the name of the property that it was when they became investors, which is Crichton Hall Vineyard, and we decided to change the name. We went through a big, long process, and we finally decided that we really liked the name Darms Lane because it showed people where the property was. And even though Darms Lane is a small little rural lane, a lot of people who are from this area know this street because it's been here since the early days of the valley. And it was settled by the Darms family, so that it was named Darms Lane. So we wanted to call the property Darms Lane because it was really about this place and the property and the beauty of this property. Well, I wanted to introduce one of the most important member of our team here at Darms Lane, and that is Brian Mox, our winemaker. Brian has been with us quite a few years, and he has a really interesting way that he got into winemaking. So I will let you, Brian, I'll let you talk about how you got into winemaking and how you got here to Darms Lane with us.
Thank you, Tricia. First of all, I'm Brian Mox, the winemaker at Darms Lane Vineyard. I'm glad to be joining you today for tasting through 3 of our current release wines. I've been in the winemaking business since about 1989, and got into it through more of a technical side of the business. I went to MIT, originally going to be an electrical engineer, and over the years, by my junior year, became a little disenchanted with the whole engineering thing. And I'd always had a love of cooking. I was the one kid in the kitchen with my mom at Christmas time, baking Christmas cookies and helping her cook. So I'd always worked kind of peripherally in some restaurants over the years, usually pretty simple diner type places. But when I was going to school out in Cambridge, I worked at a couple really nice restaurants and got interested in cooking. And kind of when I decided not to pursue electrical engineering, I thought about cooking as a career. But being kind of a practical person, I realized that chefs work way too hard. So in kind of part of that pursuit of my cooking career, I decided, I don't really want to work in the back of the kitchen, so I'll go do some waitering. And so I learned about waiting. And part of learning to be a server is you have to learn about wine. And at that point in my career, this was, I think, 1987, 1988, I really wasn't that interested in wine, being from the Midwest. I was born in Michigan and grew up in Wisconsin. So, coming out of high school, most of the things I drank were beer. And maybe if it was wine, what was that, Boone's Farm or something like that? But anyway, so I wasn't really into wine that much, but I really liked food. So part of being a server is learning about wine, and I started to learn more about wine. And I think one of the first books I read was Kevin Zraly's Windows of the World book on wine appreciation. And that really got me into it. And the more I learned about wine, kind of how it connected to cooking, how it connected to agriculture, and how it connected to the sciences, mainly chemistry and biology, it kind of got me interested in it. So after taking a year off of school, when I came back, I switched to chemistry, which was always probably one of my stronger subjects, and started pursuing a degree in chemistry. And at the same time, in 1989, I worked my first harvest in Long Island, New York. So that was kind of like the closest wine region to where I was going to school. And through that harvest, I learned that I did enjoy, winemaking. It's funny, there's a lot of romanticism about winemaking, but when you're actually working in the cellar and making wine, it's a lot of sanitation. It's almost like manufacturing. And food. It's a food making endeavor. So it's a lot of kind of grunt work, a lot of sanitation, but I really enjoy making things. So after that one harvest in 89, I said, I think I want to pursue this. And so by 1991, I moved out to California to really start pursuing my career, and moved to Napa right away because I really wanted to be at the center of the winemaking industry in North America. So that was really my early start, was out here in 91, working in Napa Valley. And I've stayed ever since, which kind of surprised me a little bit. I figured by now I'd be somewhere in the Central Coast or Mendocino or whatever, somewhere off the beaten path. But Napa really is really a great place to be as a winemaker, because there's just so much going on here. You learn so much, and you're involved in so many different styles of winemaking, actually, even though you may not think that much. So since 91, I've been working here, and in 2003, I decided to kind of venture out into my own and winemaking. And that's when I actually got my first real independent winemaking job, working for the Bumps, with what used to be called Crichton Hall and is now Darms Lane. So I've been working with Tricia and her family since 2003 in crafting these wines. And part of that was, the original vineyard was planted in the late 70s, and it was all Chardonnay. And we were known as a Chardonnay house mostly in those early years. And in 2001 to 2004, we replanted the vineyard and turned it mostly over to the Bordeaux Red, so mostly Cabernet Sauvignon with a little Merlot and some Cabernet Franc. But we've kept Chardonnay, and so we still make that. So that kind of gets me to where I am today. So I've really enjoyed working with the vineyard, seeing it develop over the years, and making the wines with the Bump family.
And one of the ways that we met Brian when he was going off on his own was we were making the Crichton Hall wines at a custom crush facility here in Napa called Laird Family Estate. So a lot of small wineries don't build their own winery. They use other people's wineries to make their wine, because as you can imagine, building a winery facility is a big endeavor. So Brian had worked with the Laird family at their custom crush facility. And when we went to Rebecca Laird, who runs Laird Family, and asked her for suggestions for people who might be good fits for us for winemakers, she actually suggested Brian, and so after my sister Tina interviewed him and my father Larry, we decided to work together. And then what's funny is, as the circle turns, Brian is now our winemaker, and he now makes the Laird family wines as well. So he continues to be at Laird. After all this time, you have not, you've actually still been at Laird all this time.
It's hard to escape. I try sometimes. Every once in a while I try.
You've gone away for small periods of time.
But I keep coming back.
You're still there. So today we thought we would take you through our current vintages of wines. So that includes our 2018 Chardonnay, our 2018 Pinot Noir from the Russian River, and then our 2016 Bon Pas Cab that comes from our property here in Napa. So Brian, you want to take us through the wines?
Yeah, let's start out. We're going to start, generally in tasting, I'll just kind of go over, just so we're all on the same footing, a couple basic things about tasting. Generally, we're going to want to taste from the lighter or whiter wines to the heavier and darker wines. So we will start with the Chardonnay, then go to the Pinot Noir, which is a lighter to medium bodied red wine in general, and then the Cabernet, which is of course a heavier bodied red wine. We're going to be tasting the 2018 Darms Lane Chardonnay. So my general winemaking philosophy is to try to we tend to make wines that some people consider a little bit more elegant. We tend to want to have them reflect the area that the grapes come from. That's an aspect we call terroir, which probably many of you have heard. And so as part of that, we don't want to get really overripe wines that are really high alcoholic or don't have any acid. So we're trying to look for balanced wines. We're trying to make balanced wines that go well with food and are interesting and complex, and really wines that make you want to come back for a second taste. And I think that's what we get through what we do to the wines. I mean, I think our wines are really very, very handcrafted. So we spend a lot of time actually physically somewhat in contact with the wine. I don't necessarily have my hands in the wine, but close to the wine. So, and then for actual tasting of, one thing there tends to be three things we kind of evaluate with wine when we're tasting, and I just want to go through that after this whole spiel here. One is kind of the color and clarity. Depending on how the wine is made, it doesn't necessarily have to be completely brilliantly clear. Our wines are aged, and then we do a light filtration before bottling. So we should be quite brilliant in the appearance, and we tend to be kind of light golden. And generally, with white wines, you get a golden color from aging in oak barrels. That's where most of the golden color comes from. You can kind of think of it like the difference between vodka and bourbon. Vodka is not aged in wood, but bourbon is. So really the difference in color between a white spirit and a darker spirit is just the color that you get from the oak. And it's the same thing, you'll see that effect on wine, meaning white wines that are stainless steel fermented will be very light, pale in color, or almost clear. Sometimes you'll see that with like Rieslings or Pinot Grigios that really don't see any oak. So for Chardonnays, we'll get a little bit of golden color from the oak. And also they'll get more golden as they get older. So we evaluate the kind of the appearance of the wine and just say, is it kind of typical for the age of the wine and the style that the wine was made? And I would say yes, it's a relatively young Chardonnay, and we've got kind of a nice light golden color from the barrel aging. And then the next thing we'll evaluate is the aroma, and we swirl the glass a little bit, because what we want to do is kind of get the aromas to release into the bowl of the wine, into the headspace. So we swirl.
And sometimes it is easier if you leave your glass on the table and swirl. That's kind of the easier way to get started with swirling. And then as you get a little bit more, you can then start raising it up. That'll keep it from flying out of the glass.
And then you can go try to do left-handed.
That's right.
I'm not
Clockwise, counterclockwise.
Anyway, so we want to evaluate the aroma. And again, this wine we tend to get kind of apple pear, a little bit of that brioche, a little bit of that lemon curd. Sometimes I'll see what we call stone fruit aromas, which can be kind of peach, apricot. To me, they're pretty subtle in our vineyard. So sometimes I think of them more as a white peach which to me is kind of a more floral peach aroma. And then after we evaluate the aroma, then we're going to taste it. What we've been waiting for, right?
It's the best part.
And to me, our Chardonnay, we have nice balanced acidity. So it's not flabby or it's not real high acid like a Sauvignon Blanc or a Pinot Grigio. But it's got nice balance, a nice acidity that I think really matches well with food. Like a pasta with a chicken and a cream sauce, for sure. It would be a classic combination with this. It could even go with salmon, I think, sometimes, although Pinot Noir we tend to think of as more maybe a salmon wine. But to me, it's got that nice kind of crispness, and then it finishes with some nice creaminess, and then it really, to me, is just a very interesting, not over the top, it's a little more subtle, a little more elegant, but I think, again, it just makes me want to come back for another sip, and it's the kind of wine that I think just keeps you interested over the course of your meal or that course that you're having it with.
Absolutely. And I think with Napa Valley Chardonnay, for sure, there's sort of a spectrum of Chardonnay, and you have a tendency to be, on the heavy side, you would have a really, really oaky, buttery Chardonnay, which we've all had from Napa, and there's some beautiful ones out there. And there's definitely a place for that, but I think ours is more in the middle of the spectrum because we're not super crisp. It has some really nice acidity, like Brian was saying, but it does have that touch of oak and just that touch of butter. So it does go really, really well with butter flavored dishes. So like scallops that are sauteed in butter, really, really beautiful, goes with that. But it has that really nice balance that we're going to talk about that a lot during this tasting. That is definitely like one of the things that we strive for with all of our wines is that balance. And we're not trying to kind of hit you over the head with the wine, but we want you to appreciate the wine for kind of walking that line of some acidity, you have that nice flavors, but not kind of hit you over the head with things.
Yeah, and the one thing we haven't said specifically, but I hope you all understand, is that there is no right or wrong way to make wine. We've chosen a certain style that we tend to appreciate and we think goes well with a meal and with food. But you really, as a wine drinker, as a wine taster, you need to kind of explore. I would explore wines and really discover what you like. You may love our wines, and I hope you do, because I think they're very nice wines. But you may find wines of a different style. So part of the fun about appreciating wine is that exploration of the different flavors and styles and the different varieties. I mean, there's hundreds of varieties of grapes out there. It's not just Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Cabernet, although that's, tends to be what we tend to make in this part of the world. And there are certainly some of the best grape varieties, I think, as far as making wine. So this Chardonnay has always been one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And we've been pretty consistent in our winemaking throughout the year. So we started the Darms Lane brand of Chardonnay in 2009, and we've pretty much made it very similarly over the years. It's a style that I had established, quite a few years before that, and I feel very comfortable in the way we make the wine and the, kind of what the results are going to be in that style that it produces. And that starts from the grape growing, how we grow the grapes, through to the finishing and bottling of the wine.
And I will say, even though Brian won't say this about himself, but he is actually really well known in the Valley for being really, really good with Chardonnay, and especially this style of Chardonnay, barrel fermented and aged on the lees and all of that. So he has consulted for other wineries for Chardonnay specifically. So it's very, very well made wine, thanks to Brian.
Why, thank you, Tricia.
You're welcome.
So I think is that enough about Chardonnay?
I think so.
Okay.
I think it's delicious.
Yeah.
Excellent job.
Like we, it seems like, as we always say in Napa, this vintage is always the best vintage.
That's right. Until next year's.
Until
vintage.
next year's, of course. But no, 18 really is one of my, probably of the last 5 or 6 vintages, 18 is one of my favorites. So,
Yeah.
You know, both whites and reds. It's really nice. Okay, shall we move on?
We shall.
So now we are going to go to our Pinot Noir. And Tricia should probably start out the
Right.
story of this wine.
So we do not grow our own Pinot Noir. The Pinot Noir is a sourced wine for us. So this is grapes that we buy from a property in the Russian River. Sort of how this came to be is Larry, my father, one of his favorite wines is a Pinot Noir. And of course we do not grow Pinot Noir. So we were talking about this for quite a few years. And Brian was working for another winery here in Napa that was buying fruit from a really well-known grower in the Russian River, the Dutton family. So it was from the Dutton Ranch. And so he and my dad got on the phone one time, sort of unbeknownst to me. And my dad sent Brian over to the Duttons to ask them if they had any fruit available. And luckily, they did that year. I think we got really lucky. 2010.
Yeah,
the first
2010
vintage.
is our first vintage of Pinot Noir.
So I really laughingly say that the Pinot Noir is really my dad's wine. So the first year I think we made 200 cases or so. And then over the years we kind of built it up a little bit more. So we make about 380, 390 cases. But it really started off as really a personal love project of my dad's. So
Yeah, so, and I as a winemaker, Pinot Noir is one of the more challenging grapes to make. Part of it is just managing it in the vineyard to get it to its optimal level of ripeness, and because it's susceptible to some challenges out in the vineyard, I'll just leave it at that. And the reason we are sourcing it from Sonoma, so from the Russian River in Sonoma, is that we do grow in Napa Valley. There is Pinot Noir, and we are probably at the very northern edge of where Pinot Noir is typically grown in California, which is at the very southern end of the valley. So most of the Pinot Noir tends to grow in Carneros, and we're about 5-6 miles north of Carneros here. But I've over the years tended to like Pinot Noir more from the Sonoma coast, which is a little cooler than Carneros. So I think we get a slightly different flavor profile out of the Russian River Valley or Sonoma coast than we do out of Carneros. And that's kind of the main impetus of where we wanted to go with the Darms Lane program. Is it can have some darker fruit characters. It can also have some kind of cherry fruit character. So it tends to vary a little bit depending on the vintage and the clones of Pinot that you use. But we've been working with the Duttons since 2010 and have moved one vineyard. So we started in the Barron Vineyard, and now we're making it the Goff Witten Vineyard. So I think we've kind of moved up to a slightly better vineyard about 4 or 5 years ago. And so to me, this wine has a little bit more kind of effusive fruit to it. I mean, I think the fruit profile of this vineyard, the Goff Witten Vineyard, is really emblematic of Pinot Noir. It's got that kind of really candied red fruit most of the time. So it's more like the raspberry or strawberry. Occasionally on probably a less ripe year, we get a little cranberry. And then, of course, Pinot Noir has cherry. So we tend to get those kind of red flavors. And then, of course, we age in oak. And so we get kind of some baking spices, which tends to come from, I think, a little bit from the grape variety, but mostly from the barrels. So, we'll see some cinnamon, some oak toast, some of that brioche character we see in the Chardonnay. And then that all comes together with generally a really nice long finish in this wine. The one thing we do that's kind of similar in most of our wines is I'm a real believer in utilizing the yeast sediment that kind of sinks down into the barrels, that settles out of the barrels through aging, and to actually stir that back up into the wine early in its life to help. What I think that does is as that yeast lees breaks down, it tends to build a little body and creaminess in the wine. So it's a fairly common thing to do in Chardonnay. A little less common, but still done quite a bit in Pinot Noir. And then it's not done as much in reds like Cabernet, but we also do a little bit of that in our Cabernet winemaking early on in the process. So the Pinot Noir does get some lees stirring to help give it body over the first 6 months of its life. And then we want the wine to settle down so it can clarify and get ready for bottling. So this wine, again, it tends to be kind of medium in color for a Pinot Noir. We tend to get a nice garnet, nice red color. And, you know, again, the aromas of this is that kind of, it's almost a raspberry, kind of really bright cherry. A little bit of kind of that toastiness from the oak and a little cinnamon. You know, I don't know, it reminds me of some kind of spiced bread or something, you know, in the kitchen. And again, looking at the palate, again, what we're trying to build in the wine is, you know, we want to make sure during fermentation is when you're really extracting all the color and the tannin and the body of the wine. And really, for a red wine, that fermentation is only about 2 weeks long. We get pressed off the skins and it goes to barrel right away. So our goal is to make a wine that has some structure so that it can age nicely and develop over time. But we also want, again, a little elegance. We want it to be fairly smooth so that when we release the wine, you know, it's really can drink well, but will age, you know, usually for Pinot Noirs, I like to say probably the best years for our Pinots are probably 4 to 6 years from the vintage date. So this is 2018. So we're kind of just getting into where I think, you know, it's getting really, I mean, it tastes great today. I'm kind of kicking myself saying,
right.
I don't think you want to wait 2 years. You can start drinking it now.
You can start drinking it now.
But this is a wine that will really taste nice for, you know, the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
But it's really got really nice fruit now. You know, as it gets older, the fruit will kind of diminish a little bit. More of the spice characters come out in the oak, and the palate will soften a little bit more. So it's kind of depending, again, just like with types of wines that you like, kind of the age of the wine you like to drink in is really a personal decision. Some people like young wines, some people like older wines. You know, as long as you kind of know how the wine develops, that as it gets older, you know, the fruit characters will diminish a little bit. It'll become more complex, but the palate will soften a little bit and become less tannic, you know, less astringent. But generally our wines, you know, especially the Pinot Noir, we tend to make, you know, relatively smooth and soft and ready to drink now. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the nice things about Pinot Noir.
And I think as we see our Pinot Noir age, we see more of like a earthiness and some mushroom character and some savory characteristics come out, which are really, I think are really nice, especially in Pinot Noir to have those.
Yeah, I mean, a classic descriptor for Pinot Noir, they say, the French say forest floor or whatever that means. Right. But that's that kind of, that earthy, mushroomy character.
Wet leaves, something.
Complexity.
Something.
Gives complexity to the wine.
Yes.
But right now, it's definitely more fruit-driven side, and as it gets older, it'll become more like that.
So as people learn their own palate and what they like, then it helps you understand if you like older wines or younger wines. If you like more fruit flavor and aromas, then if you drink younger wines, then you'll be rewarded every time. And if you like a little bit more earthy characteristic or savory, then you wait for older wines or you find varietals that have more of those characteristics.
Yes, exactly.
As a young wine. So I think it's a beautiful Pinot Noir, and even though it is jokingly my dad's wine, we really have enjoyed having the Darms Lane Pinot Noir as a wine that we sell to customers, because I think for some people it just kind of fits that spot in Pinot Noir, because some people really like kind of more powerful Pinot Noirs. Ours is, again, balanced Pinot Noir, really nice fruit, really nice balance of the palate. So I love our Pinot Noir.
And I think, kind of touching on what Tricia was saying for the style of Pinot Noir, I think the style of these different styles of Pinot Noir that people see are really driven a lot by the vineyard. So in this this is an example of a wine that I don't really shape very much. The wine kind of shapes itself, and I kind of just stay there to try to keep it from falling over. So it's really a wine that doesn't really just make itself. We do a few things in the cellar to kind of push it to one style, but again, the vineyard really, I think in Pinot Noir especially, the vineyard really makes the wine.
Yeah. So thank you. That was really nice. Really nice. So now let's talk about the cab, the one that we've been making the longest and comes 100% from our property, and I think probably the one that we've spent the most time on, you and I together, talking about the wine and sort of getting us to where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, certainly this is the flagship of the brand, as it should be, because we're trying to, showcase the estate. This is, if you've never had a chance to come out to Napa Valley in general, it's a very beautiful part of the country, like many parts are. But this vineyard in particular, I think, is just a really beautiful site. We're in the western side of the valley, so we look towards the eastern side of the valley over to the Stag's Leap District. So it's a really beautiful vantage point. We're also in a part of so being on the western side of the valley and the southern part, so we're just a few miles north of the town of Napa and a little bit south of Yountville. So we're kind of between Napa and Yountville, in what's called the Oak Knoll District. And what I like about this area is we are a little cooler, and probably not much Cabernet was grown here till about 20-30 years ago. This was really typically an area more for Chardonnay, even Pinot Noir. They used to grow a little bit more Pinot Noir here, and now still grow a fair amount of Chardonnay in this area, because I think it's actually one of my favorite areas for Chardonnay. But as climate has gotten warmer, certainly Cabernet does well here now and probably will do better in the future. Another variety they tend to grow a lot here is Merlot. So Oak Knoll District tends to have a fair amount of Chardonnay, a fair amount of Merlot, and now more and more Cabernet Sauvignon. And we see it doing better. But saying that, certainly in this part of the valley, in the southern, we tend to be a little on the cooler side for Cab, so we're not going to be one of those real huge, fruity, alcoholic Cabernets. Again, we're going to be a little more elegant, a little more balanced. The flavor profile is going to be, I think, more like cassis or blackberry, sometimes plum. We're going to get some of those what we call savory notes. It might be like walking into a briar patch, a blackberry patch, like you get kind of some of the green characteristic of that. And what it does to me is it lends the wine with really nice complexity, really nice fruit flavors, but also just some edge. Cabernet Sauvignon can have some of these other edges that you don't always see in wines from really warmer areas. But I think you get nice complexity. And nice thing about our area as well, being just a little on the cooler side of the Cabernet spectrum, is that our wines have great color. I mean, they're really, we're not up on the hillside, so the wines aren't going to be extremely tannic, but we get good concentration. We tend to get slightly smaller berries being kind of right at the edge of the hills. But we also get kind of some of that smoothness, some of the length in the wine that you'll see more as you get onto the alluvial part of the valley or the valley floor. Mm-hmm. And probably one of the, Tricia mentioned a little bit about the history of this wine. We've been making it since 2005 was the first vintage. And, over the years, we've, the wines from this vineyard can be a little on the tannic side. So sometimes they take a little bit of aging to appreciate. And so that's one area where I've worked on, say, in winemaking, is to still get the body and the richness in the wine without getting as much tannin extraction. So it's really, as a winemaker, you don't want to leave stuff behind in the grapes. I mean, you want to, pick the grapes, when they're appropriately ripe, when you ferment them, get all the color and kind of all the richness and the body and the flavor out of the grapes. But if you go too far, you can get wines that are a little more tannic and can be drying and astringent. And certainly early on, I think we were pushing the wines a little bit more in that direction. In those wines, probably age a little better than the wines we're making now. But the question is, do you want to wait those extra couple of years? And most people don't. So again, I would say our Cabernet has moved a little bit more into a more balanced style that has really nice what we call structure, gives that kind of tannin that we extract from the skins and the seeds, helps the wine age, gives it structure, helps it go well with food.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing about our vineyard is the wines tend to have pretty good acidity. So again, it's going to be a little bit more elegant, but it's got the richness. We tend to, for us, picking ripe is not so ripe compared to some people up in the valley, but the wines have nice richness and flavor, but it has good supporting acidity so that they're really going to go well with food. So again, this is a wine that I think as you taste it, you're going to keep coming back to it, and you're going to find something new in the wine, some new flavor, some new aspect of the palate, some new taste, especially if you have it with different foods.
Yeah. We always sort of use the dark fruit character as a good descriptor of the fruit that comes from this property. And I think this is just a perfect example of like that really dark kind of blackberry cassis flavor profile.
Yeah, and just tasting it now, another flavor that is probably partly from the fruit and also partly from the oak aging is I tend to get chocolate or cocoa or sometimes mocha, a little coffee chocolate. And to me, that's a really pleasant flavor in a Cabernet Sauvignon.
Definitely.
Yeah. But, now this is 2016, so we're 4 years old. So we're just getting into the point where I think it's really starting to hit its stride. Mm-hmm. Typically from our vineyard, and I would say it's fairly common, it's a common recommendation probably for most of Napa Valley. I tend to like them between as early as 6 to 10 years from the vintage date, but usually 7-8 years from the vintage date, I think is when it's really at its peak for me. And again, that's a personal preference. I used to like older wines, but as I've gotten older, I've tended to like younger wines, but maybe that's a male thing, I'm not sure. But so where maybe I used to drink 15-year-old Napa Cabs, now I'm more in the 7 to 10-year-old Napa Cabs.
And it's always better to err on the side of drinking too early than too late, right?
Yeah, the worst thing is to have half a case of wine in your cellar and realize it's kind of over the hill.
Right. You should have started earlier.
Yes, that's a waste. But anyway, yeah. Yeah, that's a good thing. Buy a case and then have at least a bottle once a year,
right,
just to see how it goes. And then
or every 6 months.
And then when you start liking it, then have it every 6 months.
Right. Because you can always decant. So you can always, if it's too early, you can always give it a little bit more air and kind of let it breathe some, or wait till the next day. There's a few things you can do to
so you usually with our cab, like Tricia's saying, that when it's young, so probably when it's first released and it's our current release and you're buying it from us, that aerating the wine a little bit will help it open up, and doing that, opening it. One thing we often do is if you don't have a decanter, is just pouring a glass out and then kind of letting the bottle sit there, for a couple hours. So just pour a glass out a couple hours ahead of time and let the kind of open bottle sit there.
Yeah.
And that helps. But also I think what you'll notice is that in your glass, as just as you sit there and you swirl it and aerate it, that's one reason you want a big wine glass, is you need to put enough in the glass so that you're drinking it over the course of 30 minutes or an hour. And you can see how it changes even over just that short amount of time.
So thank you guys for joining us today, and we really appreciate you taking the time to taste the wines with us. And thanks to the OSU Alumni Association for inviting us to be part of this project. I think it's a really great way to connect with people in a time when we're having trouble connecting in real life. So really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. Thank you very much.
Go Pokes!
That's right. Go Pokes.